They put Star Wars in Destiny, more specifically Renegades just released, which is a collaboration between Bungie and Lucasfilm Games to create a Destiny expansion inspired by Star Wars. From the moment Renegades was announced back in May, I was a bit worried about how it would turn out. Keep in mind, prior to September, we knew very little about what Renegades would actually be, and pretty much all we'd seen was a teaser showing Guardians wielding lightsabers and blaster pistols. After more details trickled out, I got progressively less worried, but still had reservations about it. Now that the expansion is out, I've played it for a few days and unsurprisingly have a lot of thoughts about it. I want to start with what I liked the most, the gameplay. My overall impression is that Renegades is a lot of fun to play. Renegades is the first Destiny expansion since House of Wolves to not launch with a patrol zone. Instead, it focuses on a series of pseudo-patrol bubbles across Mars, Venus, and Europa, called the Lawless Frontier. As a result, the presentation of the new areas is more akin to how the Dreadnought was handled in episode Heresy, containing activities that encourage exploration, but limit what part of the destination the player has access to at any given point. The various post-campaign Lawless Frontier activities feel about as fun as the Nether did to me back in Heresy, which is a huge compliment coming from me because the Nether was one of my favorite seasonal activities of all time. Bungie, please bring back the Nether, I miss it a lot. The Lawless Frontier has a larger focus on the actual objectives, and doesn't feel as full to the brim with secrets, but there's probably stuff we haven't found yet. I would have liked to see an explore difficulty for the Lawless Frontier with more secrets for people looking for the patrol zone exploration fix, but I'm still very happy with what the Lawless Frontier actually is. It takes place as a war between 3 different factions: the Piker Elixni, the Tharsis Reformation Vex, and the Totality Division Cabal. The war is spread across the 3 different planets, and has 3 different game modes: Sabotage, Bounty Hunt, and Smuggle. These rotate over time with which faction controls what territory. Each game type has a series of smaller objectives you accomplish along the way, like the Nether. It also features a Nether-style health system, akin to the Brawn modifier, but appears to have launched in what I would consider a fairly balanced state compared to the Nether, which needed a major balancing pass for healing abilities after the first week. Bungie seems to have learned from that experience. The Lawless Frontier also features the return of Gambit-style invasions. However, Renegades' version is smart because it integrates them into the gameplay loop without making invasions so important to the game mode that they determine the entire outcome of the game, making the mode's PvE elements feel less important. Instead, invasions only occur in a specific set of activities that take place in contested territory, so you can avoid them if you want to. However, I don't think there's any reason to be afraid of them, because I've never lost a run due to an invasion, and I've only played with match-made teammates. The invader loads in at some point during the mission, although in my experience it tends to be relatively early on. They then have a limited time to teleport in and get as many kills as possible to maximize their loot. Invasion only takes a few minutes at most and takes a maximum of 6 res tokens out of the 12 you start with. Invaders can also get increased rewards by wagering death marks, adding a risk-reward element. I think this is a fun twist that elevates the Lawless Frontier and actually makes it feel like a Lawless Frontier. There's also the possibility to matchmake with another invader and get sent to a 1v1 arena, which is kind of interesting. I like the battles against teams of 3 more though because they actually feel like Gambit invasions. The level design of each area takes very obvious inspiration from the original Star Wars trilogy. Venus is a stand-in for both Dagobah and Endor, Mars is a stand-in for Tatooine, and Europa is a stand-in for Hoth. I think the mileage on this varies a bit. It doesn't detract from gameplay most of the time, but there are some particular locations that feel a bit on the nose, to the point of being a little bit jarring. In particular, the turrets on Europa are just straight up ripped from Empire Strikes Back design-wise, and Spider's barge feels a bit too similar to Jabba's barge from Return of the Jedi. I personally would have preferred if they kept this Star Wars inspiration, but used modified versions of the pre-existing Destiny models for turrets and catches instead. These nitpicks aside, the Lawless Frontier is quite fun, and I see myself enjoying it a lot in the coming months. The centerpiece of the Lawless Frontier is a new social space called Tharsis Outpost. While it obviously takes inspiration from the Mos Eisley Cantina, Tharsis Outpost feels very Destiny in its design. I also love that there's quite a bit to explore here, with occasional random NPCs to talk to, items and resources to buy, secrets to find, and even a homeless Elixni you can buy junk from, to gamble on it being valuable. It makes the social space feel very alive and actually enjoyable to visit. This is in contrast to the tower, which with the recent removal of most NPC rep tracks, has little reason to be visited aside from picking up rewards you've earned or accessing your postmaster. The main gameplay system Renegades introduces is Renegade Abilities. There are 9 unique combat abilities that can be used in Lawless Frontier activities. These are mainly traps and vehicles, with examples being a pool that heals players and recharges abilities, Cabal drop pods that can damage enemies but also contain ammo, a combat sparrow, airstrikes, and an ATST. The ATST is the only ability that feels directly ripped from Star Wars, so it stands out. It's quite fun to use, but I wish its design wasn't so obviously just aping an ATST. I found myself using Revitalize, the healing ability, the most, because the lack of health regen makes dropping the healing at a crucial moment, or charging your super fast, really nice in certain situations. To access Renegade abilities, you have to use a completely new keybind, which replaces their grenade and charged melee keys with the 2 equipped Renegade abilities. This took a bit to get used to, so I found myself constantly forgetting I had access to them early on in Renegades. However, the more time I spent playing, the more often I remembered to use them in critical situations. Renegade abilities enable a deeper level of build crafting, as you can change which abilities you use at the end of the mission. I kinda wish you could make loadouts that included them, but I'm guessing the reason you can't is that they're only in a specific set of activities. I think the Renegade abilities are more successful than Edge of Fate's destination abilities, because it feels like they're being utilized to their fullest potential. The maps are fairly open, and the Lawless Frontier provides ample opportunities to make plays with them. It also helps that they're much more combat focused than the Edge of Fate abilities. I know this puts me in the minority, but I quite liked the Edge of Fate abilities. I just was a bit disappointed by how much of a lock and key system they were that wasn't utilized to create the level of puzzle solving I was expecting, given that they were advertised as inspired by Metroidvanias. In keeping with the Star Wars theme, Renegades introduces a new kind of weapon, blasters. Instead of firing bullets or elemental energy like most Destiny weapons, they fire laser bursts. Blasters also don't reload in the typical way a Destiny gun would. Instead, they have a heat meter that starts at 0 and slowly rises with each shot, maxing out at 100%. When you're at 100%, the blaster needs to cool back to 0 before you can fire again, which is like a typical reload. However, what makes blasters unique is that they can continue cooling even while not performing the reload animation, like for example using your abilities. They also recharge on their own whenever you're not using the weapon. This enables a fun new twist where I found myself swapping weapons or using whatever abilities were charged whenever my blasters were venting heat. The weapons team did a very good job making blasters. They're very satisfying to use and enable interesting new forms of build crafting. Originally, everyone thought that the blaster from the reveal teaser was going to be an exotic, but instead, blasters are a new legendary weapon frame, meaning you can use them with other exotic weapons. The blaster from the teaser is the special ammo arc hand cannon Uncivil Discourse. Uncivil Discourse is without a doubt the most fun blaster to use, because it feels a lot more like if you made a legendary version of Forerunner, but as a blaster. blaster. The only thing I dislike about it is that I think the sound effects are way too similar to Star Wars blasters, which feels a bit on the nose. The other blasters I've used so far don't have this problem, and sound more like augmented Destiny weapons. I'm guessing Uncivil Discourse has that sound design because it's modeled after Han Solo's iconic blaster, but I still would have preferred sound effects that felt a bit more distinct. My only nitpick about blasters is I find the UI for the heat system a bit unintuitive. Typically in Destiny, your mag ammo in the HUD reads 0 when you need to reload, but for heat weapons it's the opposite. 0% means your weapon is ready to fire, while 100% means you need to reload. I think this is counterintuitive and makes quickly identifying your ammo count at a glance more difficult for blasters. I think either changing it from a percentage to merely show the meter, or making 100% mean that the weapon is 100% cooled and operating at 100% efficiency would be more intuitive and less confusing when swapping between blasters and non-blasters. As far as I know, Renegades launches with 3 exotic weapons: the Praxic Blade, which is the lightsaber, Heirloom, which is Chewbacca's crossbow and is apparently the Equilibrium dungeon exotic, and Service of Luzaku, which is the Season Pass exotic. I haven't gotten my hands on Heirloom as the dungeon isn't out yet. I'm a bit disappointed that the dungeon weapons and exotic were revealed in advance of the dungeon's launch, because I like discovering them on launch day as I played the new Raider dungeon, but that was spoiled this time around. Service of Luzaku is an exotic strand machine gun that behaves like a support auto rifle, but when you hipfire at allies to heal them, the weapon is reloaded from reserves, which if played right means you essentially never have to reload. Final blows spawn threadling nests that if you stand near will unleash threadlings on subsequent final blows. It's a fun weapon to use if you want to take on a support role or combine it with threadling builds, especially after the recent buffs to Weaver's Call. However, the real star of the show is obviously the Praxic Blade, the Destiny version of a lightsaber, which is obtained during the campaign. The Praxic Blade is one of the most fun exotics we've gotten in a long time. It's incredibly satisfying to use. I particularly like the feel of the boomerang throw and redirecting enemy fire back onto them by blocking. However, like Uncivil Discourse, the sound effects feel a bit on the nose. It sounds like a bootleg lightsaber sound effect, like the kind you'd find in a fan film. I would have liked something a bit more unique. The lightsaber also comes with the ability to customize it to a much greater ability than any previous exotic weapon, with 12 colors, 3 forms, 3 cores, 11 mods, and 4 different catalysts. Each of these are unlocked in a variety of methods throughout the Lawless Frontier and the exotic mission. However, there are 3 exceptions. Only 9 of the blade colors are earnable through gameplay, while the remaining 3 are Eververse exclusives. I understand and am totally fine with Eververse cosmetics, even if I think they're often a bit overpriced for what you get. However, I think the 3 lightsaber colors being Eververse exclusive is a bit much. Most exotic ornaments change both the model and colors of the exotic, while those 3 literally just change the RGB values of the glow. We have Eververse shaders, but they're always a combination of colors and designs that can be applied to any weapon or armor. I would be fine with hilt ornaments, but changing a single color is where I draw the line. Each set contains a single hilt and blade color, and costs 1,000 silver, which is the equivalent of $10. Most Eververse weapon ornaments cost 700 silver, which means Bungie is valuing the blade colors at $3 each. However, you can't buy them outside the bundle. I get that Bungie is struggling right now, but this is not it. Renegades again launches with only 3 exotic armor pieces. I'm not going to review them here because I've only acquired the Warlock one so far and likely won't have time to replay the campaign on my other characters for a bit. What I will say though is I don't want the 3 exotic armor pieces and 3 exotic weapons from both Edge of Fate and Renegades to become standard for future future expansions. The number of exotics per expansion has been getting smaller and smaller year over year, and I hate this trend. I love getting new exotics and experimenting with different builds using them, so seeing the number drastically decrease this year compared to previous ones kinda sucks. In previous $40 expansions like Beyond Light and Witch Queen, we tended to get 7 exotic weapons and 6 exotic armor pieces. Forsaken and the Taken King launched with even more. This also doesn't even take into account the fact that in addition to the expansion dropping with exotics, we tended to get 1 new exotic per class with the launch of most seasons, which doesn't seem to be a thing anymore if Ash and Iron was any indication. It feels really bad to see this level of shrinkflation. I'll talk more about the price at the end of this review. I played Renegades' campaign solo on Legendary difficulty. Renegades' campaign felt like it was slightly shorter than Edge of Fate's if we exclude Edge of Fate's side quests. It's in a similar format to Edge of Fate, having 5 major missions with a few others sprinkled in. Most of these other missions are called jobs and are basically just Lawless Frontier activities with a tighter structure, plus set pieces and story moments. They function as the analog to Edge of Fate's time-lapse missions. Finally, the Fire and Ice exotic mission is thrown into the middle, which I will talk about shortly. Renegades' campaign took me about 8 hours to complete. This was extended a bit by experiencing some issues like error codes, contacting Destiny 2 servers, and 2 different missions soft locking on me, leading me to waste a bunch of time trying to figure out what I was supposed to do, only to realize that an objective hadn't spawned properly and I needed to restart the mission. Finally, one of the jobs anteatered me when the ending cutscene was supposed to begin playing, forcing me to redo the entire mission from the beginning. Additionally, I solved the exotic mission on my own without looking anything up, which took me about 80 minutes. I don't know if I just have gotten lucky in the past with regards to bugs and server issues, but Renegades was by far the buggiest experience I've had playing a new Destiny campaign on launch day, surpassing even the final shape, which kept kicking me to orbit periodically, but usually saved my progress when I relaunched. I also encountered an annoying behavior where the game kept automatically selecting normal difficulty for missions instead of legendary or expert, which meant I had to manually select the higher difficulty even though I was playing the campaign on legendary. I don't know if I accidentally played any missions on normal because of this. I know for sure that I got the legendary triumph and the exotic, so if I missed any, it was one of the missions that don't count towards the legendary triumph. It would have been nice if Renegades functioned like Edge of Fate and automatically selected legendary or expert difficulty without having to constantly reselect it, creating a consistent, frictionless experience. Renegades' legendary campaign felt very easy compared to even Edge of Fate's. I'm guessing this is a combination of Year of Prophecy's changes to difficulty scaling and power creep caused by Edge of Fate's sandbox changes. When Edge of Fate launched, a lot of the ability sandbox changes weren't working as intended, so when they were fixed it made Guardians significantly stronger. Additionally, a bunch of abilities and exotics have been buffed since Edge of Fate launched, making things easier. Legendary difficulty is advertised as being for veteran shooter players, which in the past has meant that it will actually provide at least a little bit of friction and challenge for veteran Destiny players. Renegades' legendary difficulty didn't hit that mark. Minor spoilers for the final mission, you can skip to the timecode on screen if you want to avoid them. Most bosses were pushovers, especially the final boss fight against Premier Loom, which felt anticlimactic. He doesn't even register compared to previous final bosses like Savathun or the Witness, who are my favorite campaign final bosses. At least Callus and Lavask had aura to rely on. Loom was a nothing burger who was given no chance to shine and not enough to do in the story. I wish they had utilized the character more. The final fight on Nightfall Station was fun, but didn't feel very climactic because it wasn't a darkness zone, so no mistakes were punished like I think they should be during the climax of the campaign. Both sequences not feeling challenging led me to feel a bit disappointed by the final mission. After the campaign, there are 2 additional story quests that fill the role that the Edge of Fate side quests did, but they're significantly shorter playtime-wise. One is an introduction to factions and the Lawless Frontier gameplay systems, but also features some additional character moments that pick up after the end of the campaign. The second is to teach the player how to use the Praxic Blade by having them practice using it and then replaying Fire and Ice, which has new dialogue the second time. I liked both of these quests a lot, but can't say a whole lot else about them without story spoilers, so I'll touch on them later. The Praxic Blade is earned through the Fire and Ice exotic mission about halfway through the campaign. Fire and Ice is my favorite exotic mission since Dual Destiny, and perhaps ever, but I need to see how it ages before knowing for sure. It takes place in a pocket of the Ascendant Plane that's accessed from Europa. If you haven't played this mission yet, I would seriously recommend going in and trying to solve it blind, because I had a blast doing that. So I'm going to put a time code on screen that you can skip if you want to avoid Fire and Ice spoilers. I absolutely love when Destiny creates mechanics that resonate with the themes of the story. Previously, the exotic mission that did this the best was Star-Crossed from Season of the Wish, which is all about combining 2 buffs, each representing Riven and Tyrannus respectively, in order to travel deeper into Tyrannus's lair and uncover their eggs. I thought the execution of this idea was wonderful. Fire and Ice does this in a way that I find even more compelling. The mission represents a turning point in Honor's character arc. She's a warlock from the Praxic Order who has steadfastly held the core tenet of Praxic ideology, which is that the darkness's nature doesn't matter and that it must be destroyed. This dogma has been behind the times since Beyond Light, when Guardians started wielding the darkness directly via stasis. The story explored the idea that humanity's taboos and prejudices about the darkness may have been misplaced, and that the darkness could be used as a tool for good, while the light could be used as a tool for evil. In the lore, the idea that the light and darkness must coexist to balance each other is called the symmetry. As the Light and Darkness saga evolved, the Vanguard came to see the symmetry as truth, especially after the Guardian was able to blend light and darkness into Prismatic, with the Traveler's blessing in final shape. This left the Praxic Order in a strange position, as the Traveler had seemingly endorsed the symmetry, which was in contrast to her Order's beliefs. In a lore tab, Honor conceded that the Praxic Order's dogma might need to be revised, but she wanted to wait until all threats to humanity had been defeated. In Renegades, Honor works with the Guardian directly, seeing them use Prismatic in the field, and begins to change her mind. Honor says,
I am a sword of the Praxic Order. I was trained to believe we only needed light. That to touch darkness was to fall to evil. I was wrong. You wield the darkness as easily as the light, in a form sanctioned by the heart of the Traveler itself. It hasn't corrupted you. I've been watching. You're a living counter to Order dogma. They are stuck in the old ways. Too busy chasing old threats to spot the new. Who knows how many more Bales are out there, getting ready to threaten the city. The Praxic Order needs a new path. Maybe we can find it together.
She then takes the Guardian to a Praxic vault on Europa, where the Praxics locked away a dangerous artifact of the darkness, a pyramidal octant. Through this mission, she teaches the Guardian to forge a Praxic blade, which normally is created using the user's inner light, but for the Guardian is forged through their balance of light and darkness. This represents Honor creating a new dogma for the Praxics in a post-prismatic world. This story moment was a huge unexpected twist for me because I had read all of the lore about Honor, and especially after the Final Shape entry, thought she would never change her beliefs, or if she did, that it would be a very slow process. The mission's mechanics involve entering the Ascendant Plane and balancing the light and dark within to find the Guardian's way to the Praxic Blade. Meanwhile, the Guardian fights Taken and Barent Imperium soldiers, who have found their way into the Ascendant Plane. The Octant is initially unbalanced, so the player must find a way to balance it. When the player kills a specific Taken unit, they get a Taken energy buff. Likewise, when they kill a specific Barent Imperium unit, they get a Barent energy buff. If the player kills two opposite types of enemies in succession, they create opposite energy, spawning black orbs that can be picked up and thrown. If they kill two of the same type of enemy, they create paired energy, spawning white orbs. Around the arena there are 4 blights, 2 dark ones and 2 light ones. The dark ones correspond to opposite energy, while the light ones correspond to paired energy. Throwing the correct energy ball into a blight will grow it. However, if you grow one of the blights to be significantly bigger than the other of the same color, it will collapse into the smallest state. Each set of orbs needs to be thrown at each blight of the correct type in an alternating order so that you maintain balance. This is then repeated with the other set of blights. I love that the mechanics of the mission are all about balancing light and darkness to create symmetry. It dovetails nicely with Honor's change of heart and acceptance of the symmetry. Balancing the 4 blights balances the Octant, allowing the Guardian to travel to a mirror part of the Ascendant Plane where all the blights are light instead of dark. After traversing this area, they find the boss, who they must use the mechanics to defeat, which then allows them to forge their Praxic blade and use it. When I finally figured out the whole mechanic, I was so excited, because I realized that it was a perfect distillation of the themes of symmetry. The only downside to including an exotic mission in the middle of the campaign is that exotic missions are typically designed with a very different ethos than campaign missions. Campaign missions are designed to be very user-friendly and easy to follow, signposting where you need to go on the map and mechanics you need to complete, very explicitly. On the other hand, exotic missions are often designed in a purposely obtuse manner, forcing the player to think for themselves to solve the puzzles and traverse the map. I like both of these different design styles because they each have their own purpose. Campaign missions are easy to navigate, making the process of completing the story feel seamless, while exotic missions are difficult to navigate to invoke a sense of mystery and discovery. I'm glad Destiny has a mix of both. However, placing an exotic mission with a radically different design ethos in the middle of the campaign could be a bit jarring for players who are newer and not used to solving a new exotic mission for themselves. This then would serve as a massive difficulty spike or sense of friction all of a sudden in the middle of the campaign. I got stuck a couple of times in the mission, twice when trying to traverse the map, and once when trying to figure out the main mechanic. This was frustrating in the moment, but elevated the sense of discovery when I figured out what I was supposed to do next. I knew going in that there was going to be an exotic mission in the middle of the campaign, so I was expecting to need to lock in and solve it. But I could see someone who didn't have that expectation being annoyed by fire and ice. It's time to talk about the story. I will give my overall impressions of the story without spoilers, then move into a spoiler section. Renegades continues the main story that began in the Edge of Fate, so if you try to play Renegades without playing Edge of Fate first, you will likely be confused. I want to start with 2 pieces of feedback about the way the story was delivered that don't involve spoilers, before getting into the meat of my story opinions. The first is that I didn't like the return of orbit dialogue in Renegades. At certain points in the campaign, if you're in orbit, dialogue between the characters will play. This system was introduced in Heresy as a response to the feedback that people were tired of the holoprojector and radio messages that were used a lot in seasonal stories. However, I think the holoprojector issue was solved by the ghost phone call system that appears in Edge of Fate and Renegades. I personally thought that the radio system was fine as it was, and I don't like story conversations tied to being in orbit. This is because often when playing a campaign, you don't actually return to orbit between every mission. You're likely to launch the next step from the menu while in another location like Tharsis. However, during the loading transition to the next mission, the game thinks you're in orbit and starts to play the Renegades orbit conversations, leading them to get cut off when the mission dialogue begins.
Emissary, Commander Zavala has instructed me to seek your counsel. What connection is there between
This happened to me several times and led to me missing out on the orbit conversations. I'm still unsure if there's a way to replay them. I only caught one of them in full. I would prefer these conversations be moved to a system where the player can actually choose when they hear them, instead of randomly dropping them without any warning while in orbit. The radio system did this much more effectively. I also hope there's a way to replay them, because some of the stuff they were talking about before they got cut off sounded genuinely interesting. I also noticed something that I'm not sure whether is intentional or not, but that kind of annoyed me. Sometimes when interacting with a vendor that has text box dialogue, but also has voice lines, their idle dialogue would play when I was trying to read the text box, which was a bit jarring and distracting. It's hard for me to read when someone is talking to me directly like that. It would be nice if NPCs were silent while you read their text boxes. I liked the fact that there are a lot of random NPCs in Tharsis Outpost who have one-off text box interactions. They help the space feel very alive. I think the story is the aspect of Renegades that suffers the most from the Star Wars collab. I want to be clear about my overall impressions. I enjoyed the story and don't think it's bad. However, it felt like a bit of a letdown compared to Edge of Fate's story, which I absolutely loved. Renegades' campaign missions are filled to the brim with Star Wars references, with most occurring as design elements, visual aesthetic, cinematography, and plot points. Thankfully, the writers showed restraint and didn't cram the dialogue with Star Wars quotes, which I think would have been a bit grating. I think they did a decent job of telling a story that feels like Destiny but has Star Wars vibes, and not descending into pure slop. However, I got tired of the seemingly endless Star Wars set pieces and references, which my brain constantly grokked as such, taking me out of the moment and distracting me. The references primarily focused on the original trilogy, with a few sequel references sliding in there. I didn't notice any prequel references outside of the weapon design. My favorite parts of the story were those that leaned away from Star Wars and did things that felt very Destiny to me. The reason I think the Star Wars stuff did the narrative a disservice was because I think a lot of it was ultimately unnecessary and detracted from the story a bit. Seeing through the veneer of Star Wars references made Renegades' story feel less fresh, less interesting, and way more predictable. This was in contrast to Edge of Fate, which felt very fresh and exciting to me. I've seen the original trilogy many times before, and I ultimately am not interested in a story that mostly retreads beats from it. If I was, I would just go rewatch the original movies. This is exacerbated by the fact that Star Wars itself has made movies aping the original trilogy, as structurally The Force Awakens' plot is basically a remake of A New Hope. After the Disney acquisition, I've lost interest in Star Wars, precisely because it's lost its way, descending into an Ouroboros of self-reference and reverence for its past, to the point of being almost unable to tell fresh, compelling stories. I'm guessing this might sound overly cynical or jaded to anyone who still likes Star Wars, and you're entitled to disagree with me, but I'm also entitled to my opinion. I don't think you're wrong for enjoying something I don't, and it would be unhealthy for you to never disagree with me. I've become so exhausted with Star Wars as a franchise over the last decade that I only will pay attention if they do something genuinely fresh like Andor. I've had my fill of, remember this? It's from Star Wars. This means when that kind of metatextuality is present in other media, it either needs to be not distracting, do something interesting, or distinct enough that it doesn't feel like a cheap imitation for me to not roll my eyes at it. Stranger Things, especially its first season, is a great example of blending homage and references to other movies in a way that's interesting and not distracting. It also helps that it's doing it with a large number of properties and not married to a single one. It felt like Renegades was designed to cram as many original trilogy references in as possible, which overstayed its welcome quickly. The overtly Star Wars stuff just didn't quite work for me. It was going to have to be great to justify the narrative cost of licensing the Star Wars IP for an entire expansion. Instead, it was merely decent, leading me to see the story as a bit of a mixed bag. Destiny has always had Star Wars references in it, like most modern sci-fi fantasy. However, I think it's a bit disingenuous to say that past references like individual lines or abilities that have similarities but were legally distinct enough to not need a license from Disney are comparable to Renegades, which directly lifts enough design elements from Star Wars that they needed to license the IP directly. In the former case, Star Wars is just one small part of Destiny's DNA among other inspirations. In the latter, it consumes almost everything and is unavoidable. I'm also not pointing this out to simply hate on the expansion. I went into it in good faith hoping that I would like it. I did have a lot of fun, I just thought the Star Wars stuff resulted in the story not living up to its full potential. However, there were a decent amount of narrative moments that I actually did enjoy. To properly unpack that, I'm going to need to go to spoilers. You can skip to the timecode on screen if you want to avoid them. There were 4 main reveals that actually surprised me and got me excited. The first was the reveal that Six can talk through Dredgen Bale, and learning that he's a false weapon. I didn't expect the 9 to be able to talk through a non-emissary. This also excited me because I immediately realized that it would provide more opportunities for different voice actors to give their own takes on the 9, allowing for more stuff like the vote in the Edge of Fate, where the 9 alternate between talking through Orin and Lodi. I feel a bit mixed on how Dredgen Bale's character is handled overall. He's basically written as Walmart Kylo Ren, but even more pathetic. Bale's reaction to Six telling him that he's proud of him was all I needed to hear.
Yes, brave weapon. I see your curiosity. I see your perseverance. I feel pride. You're proud. Thank you. Thank you.
Bale clearly has some parental issues that he would rather become the illegitimate weapon of a 4-dimensional god than go to therapy for. I'm not sure how to feel about the reveal that he's not actually a light bearer. I see what they're trying to do with bringing non-light bearers into the fold more and using it as the impetus to fix the political situation in the last city, but I'm a bit disappointed that he was a fraud because Dredgens and Guardians corrupted by the darkness have been built up so much over the course of Destiny's story, and I've always really wanted to properly face one as a boss, but that's never happened. Not having them as a threat on screen feels like a huge missed opportunity. Bale being a charlatan is a choice that I can respect, but still feel a little bit disappointed by because I want to see actual Dredgens. Anyone not caught up on the lore of Dredgens may think that the end of the campaign is setting up another Dredgen, Dredgen Vale.
Dredgen Bale remains on the loose. Dark Guardian cells across the system are resurgent.
Yeah. Dredgen Vale's still out there too. There'll be a reckoning when new meets old.
But Dredgen Vale is an alter ego of Shin Malphur, the man who killed Dredgen Yor, as part of a scheme to draw out would-be Dredgen so they can be killed. It's actually setting up Shin's return to dispense justice against Bale. Also, the fact that Bale is the son of the head of Tex Mechanica is such a random idea. I'm guessing that it's supposed to make his character ironic, considering that Shin Malphur's signature hand cannon The Last Word is a Tex Mechanica weapon. I know there's more in the lore about Bale and that he'll be a focus in the dungeon, so we definitely will learn more. The second reveal I liked was that the Eclipse weapon only killed Lightbearers in Tharsis Outpost. I got very nervous when I realized that it was firing on Tharsis Outpost and that Ido was there. As the scene progressed, I noticed that it wasn't damaging buildings and finally that Ido was unharmed. I expected Nightfall Station to be a bootleg Death Star that was going to be destroying planets, so seeing that it was surgical and designed to prevent any collateral damage was a neat surprise. It was a masterstroke to fill the social space with NPC guardians and ghosts, kill them all in the cutscene, and show the social space full of their corpses afterwards, serving as fantastic environmental storytelling that creates a genuinely emotional moment. The third reveal was Honor's change of heart, which I already covered in the section about fire and ice. Honor is developed in the post-campaign quests, straying further from her previous characterization as being stuck in her own dogma. She openly defies the Vanguard by broadcasting 3's prophecy, which the Vanguard has concealed from the public to avoid a panic. She rightly believes that people have a right to know about the prophecy, having her mind changed by seeing Ido's reaction to learning the truth. Unfortunately, I got error-coded while listening to the prophecy, and when it loaded me back in, the dialogue stopped playing, so I missed the ending. I'll probably need to find someone else's playthrough to listen to the whole thing if you can't replay that part on your other characters. Stuff like this happening is a big reason why I don't like that there isn't a way to replay quests that are set to be once per account, which is a subject I've considered making an entire video on. Additionally, Honor recognizes that Bale was correct about the Vanguard rule of the last city being bad for its citizens, and says that they need to change their ways. I've been thinking for a long time that the power structures that govern the last city are probably bad for its lightless citizens, as they lack representation and are subject to the whims of guardians. I'm glad the story is finally delving into the fact that if the last city was a real government, the current state would probably be bad. Even before the fall of the Speaker and the Consensus, the city was governed as a theocratic authoritarian oligarchy, and pretty much all of those 3 types of governments tend to suppress their citizens' rights and not meet their basic needs, so them being the good guys is definitely a choice. I get that they're basically under military dictatorship and martial law, ostensibly to protect the citizens from alien threats, but that's not a good way to live. The people deserve to actually elect their leaders so that they have representatives and liaisons to the gods who walk among them. The Vanguard are basically sentient nukes that run the city. That's a recipe for disaster if you really think about it. The Vanguard also haven't even been able to finish rebuilding the Destiny 1 tower, and they've been at it for more than 8 years now. I like post-campaign Honor because she's actually based. I went into the expansion expecting to dislike her because she's a Fed and a zealot from a dogmatic religious order, and yet she ends up changing her positions when shown evidence that they're wrong, coming off very likable as a result. She goes from a rule follower to a renegade, which makes sense given the title of the expansion. It's great writing to make her character more three-dimensional and prove me wrong, making me like someone I thought I wouldn't. There's a 4th reveal that honestly was the one that excited me the most, which happens in one of the post-campaign quests. Lodi figures out that 6 can't change the future when he's inhabiting Bale, as he's in 3 dimensions instead of 4, which leads Lodi to realize that 3's instruction to bind the 9 means binding them to the 3-dimensional world of matter by having them each inhabit a person. I wasn't expecting to learn the meaning of bind the 9 so soon, so I was excited to learn that. This then creates a roadmap for the Fate Saga. We will have to find 7 other people people, one for each remaining member of the Nine, which we will use as vessels to bind the Nine, allowing us to prevent 3's prophesized extinction. I could see a world where each future expansion focuses on a particular member of the Nine, and then there's a final expansion that involves some kind of final battle where we attempt to bind all of them to their hosts. Lodi has a pretty direct lead and references something in Chicago again, so it seems like we will either go there in Shattered Cycle or Shadow and Order to figure out how to identify the first of 7 vessels. Also, having 7 vessels the Vanguard identifies is totally a Bungie move. They love the number 7. Initially, Drifter's Ghost Blue only speaks in astromech, aka R2-D2 or BB-8 beeps and boops, which was a bit immersion breaking because while ghosts do normally make beeping and buzzing noises, it's never been so overtly just a copy of Star Wars. Thankfully, we fix her up with ghost parts and she's fully voice acted for the rest of the expansion. Her VA, Stephanie Kerbis, does a really good job of bringing something completely new to the world of Destiny. I love her personality and how she's a reflection of Drifter, willing to chew him out when he does something she doesn't approve of. Blue and Drifter's dynamic fits Drifter's characterization perfectly. Stephanie is an amazing contribution to the cast. I liked Eris's dynamic with Honor, as they clearly don't get along at first but bond a bit over the course of the campaign. I wanted to see what would have happened if they tried Eris's plan to bind the Nine to her throne world. Perhaps we'll see Eris try to do that to 6 in the future, given that he seems to be connected to the Taken. I was a bit disappointed by Ido. She does have a couple of fantastic moments grieving the loss and coping with the trauma of the Nightfall Station attack, but I thought she was underutilized in Renegades. Ido is billed as part of Drifter's crew to stop the Barrent Imperium, but she gets very little screen time and doesn't actually have much to do aside from getting traumatized by the Nightfall Station attack. Ido is just a joy anytime she's on screen, so I wanted to see her utilized more. Lodi is just as great as he was in Edge of Fate, although he has a much smaller role in Renegades. I'm glad to see that he's continuing to be utilized though, because he definitely was the standout character in Edge of Fate. As for the Cabal plotline, I thought Zavala's Cerberus Bay 3 reference was pretty funny, but the bigger takeaway I had was that I was surprised Keitel wasn't involved at all. I get that this isn't an officially sanctioned Vanguard operation, but surely Keitel would have thoughts on the Barrent Imperium, considering it's made up of Cabal who defected from her empire. I expected her to show up and either join the fight against the Imperium or provide some insight into them. It felt a bit weird that she wasn't there at all, considering the fact that we nearly went to war against her during Witch Queen because Mars was her territory and she wanted to fight Savathun. I'm guessing she's not included because they're going for a Lawless Frontier vibe, and having the literal Empress of the Cabal Empire wouldn't really fit with that theme, but I still think she should have been involved in the story at least as a smaller part. Otherwise, I thought the story of Renegades was largely fine. I just got frustrated by the constant, overt Star Wars references, ultimately having mixed feelings on it, as some of it worked well for me, but other parts didn't because they didn't really do anything interesting to utilize those references. Renegades costs $40 like Edge of Fate. If there isn't any post-dungeon content, I don't think this expansion should have been priced the same as Edge of Fate. Edge of Fate had more going on, and I thought just barely justified the cost, which was carried by me liking the campaign and raid a lot. I was a little bit frustrated though that a lot of other content was missing that would have been present in the past $40 expansions. Dungeons are typically smaller than raids, and there isn't an epic version of the dungeon planned either, so it seems like Renegades has less content than Edge of Fate. The Lawless Frontier also isn't a patrol zone. I think this disparity is quite noticeable, although some people might believe that may be made up for by how replayable the Lawless Frontier is compared to Kepler and the Civ. The dungeon could be great, but the value proposition is less so. Personally, I'd say if you haven't bought Renegades yet and aren't completely sold on the Star Wars stuff, but are interested in playing it, to just pick it up on sale. I also hope that Shattered Cycle and The Alchemist are more substantial than Edge of Fate and Renegades, because what we've gotten so far from the 2 expansions per year but no season structure has felt very anemic compared to past offerings, even though they're priced similarly. I hope we get some more insight on how Bungie plans to change things in the planned State of the Game article and roadmap that are said to be dropping in 2026. I also hope that 2026 means January or early February, because I don't think the player base can handle waiting much longer, given that the player count is dropping hard. Personally, I think that while the Star Wars IP does create some fun moments, I ultimately think it detracts from Renegades and results in a worse expansion. I would have preferred a version of Renegades where the Star Wars inspiration was there as part of the DNA, and the homages didn't rise to the level of a full-on collaboration with Lucasfilm games. I'm thinking something more like the 30th anniversary pack would have been better, where they clearly reference a lot of stuff from Halo but without licensing the IP from Microsoft. However, the collab happened, so I have to accept that it happened, even if I think it wasn't the greatest idea. I am a bit worried that we're going to see more tie-in expansions like this in the future, which is why I'm giving this feedback now. I would rather not get a Marvel or Lord of the Rings collab expansion in 2 years, although I doubt the Tolkien estate would sign off on the latter. If you've already played Renegades, let me know in the comments what you thought of the expansion. And as always, thank you to everyone for watching.